Welcome to Space Design and Production. My name is Nicholas Johnson. I'm the Lighting Division Manager here at Space. In this series of videos, I will help you get acquainted with the tools and equipment we use to light up the shows you'll be working on. These videos will be sectioned off into truss assembly, wiring and lighting, and then troubleshooting. Truss. This is our aluminum triangle truss. When installed at a show, they are either placed on top of the hard booth walls or hung from the ceiling, or some combination of the two. They were built using metric measurements, so each stick of truss comes in at 3 meters, which is just a little over 9'10" per piece. Call it 10 feet. We also have shorter pieces that are 1 meter, a little over 3'3". On the floor plan, these shorter pieces will be marked in red, so they're easier to pick out. The CAD plans that we work with on site are always in feet and inches, which is why we delineate each individual stick of truss on the plan with a little tick mark. So you won't need to measure out the truss to get the length of a run, you can just count the sticks. The truss attaches together using these 3 pieces of hardware. We call them barrels, bullets, and pins. You may have worked with aluminum truss before, but there is one very important thing to notice about our barrel piece. This is the piece that plugs into the end of the truss itself. The barrel piece has a hole that goes all the way through it, but one side is larger than the other. You can tell which is the larger side because it has a beveled edge. So the beveled edge of the barrel will always face on the outside of the truss. Then a bullet goes through the barrel also from the outside of the truss. If you have the barrel spun the wrong way around, no amount of hammering is going to make the bullet go all the way through, so it comes out the bottom. And if you do hammer on it this way, it's a really easy way to get it good and stuck. Even just with my hand. The bullet needs to go all the way through to the bottom so that you can apply a pin that holds it in place. So it's really important to remember this step. The beveled edge of the barrel goes to the outside of the truss. Most of the pieces of truss will already have hardware sticking out one end or the other, and each connection between 2 pieces of truss requires only 1 barrel. But the bullets will have to be knocked through each side. When joining 2 pieces of truss, make sure you look to see that you have the electrical track facing down on both pieces. The lights have to hang down from the bottom of the truss, so if one piece is rotated in such a way, you're going to have a problem later on. There should be 2 pieces of track on every piece of truss, except for the short ones, with the plug-in track end facing in either direction. So it doesn't matter which way the truss faces when assembling it, it'll work both ways. This truss gets installed and shipped around quite a lot, so unfortunately, not all of it will join together super smoothly. In most cases, a light tap with a hammer will do the trick to install the bullets, and then each bullet gets a pin through the end of it so it doesn't come back out of the truss. Another thing to note, this truss was built in 2 batches a few years apart, and while the newer truss does fit into the older truss, it can be a bit of a wrestling match to get them assembled, so it's easiest to keep them separated where you can. It's pretty easy to spot the new stuff from the old stuff because we switched the electrical ends on the tracks for the new truss. The older truss has white track with solid white ends, and the newer truss has white track with black ends on it. Ideally, at the end of the show, the 2 different types of truss will be separated into their own stacks for shipping. Speaking of truss, this is how the truss will arrive on site. When we stack the truss up on their carts for shipping, it'll be 4 pieces of truss across the bottom and then 3 pieces of truss nestled into those 4. And when you stack the truss, make sure that they nestle down like that so that there's a flat surface across the top for the next layer. Between each layer, we have pieces of wood. We call it stacking wood. Just 2 pieces of wood on each stack, just a few feet in from each end. That's whether the stack is assembled in 10-foot or 20-foot lengths. We ship these sometimes pre-assembled into 20-foot lengths of truss or 10-foot lengths. This wood tends to get misplaced or used for unintended purposes during the build for the show, so we will be shipping an empty wire cage with the equipment to keep all these pieces of wood together. That way, you'll still have them to stack the truss up at the end of the show. Like I said a second ago, some of the truss will come pre-assembled into 20-foot lengths, so 2 pieces of truss, but stacked 9 layers high. Some of the truss comes in 10-foot lengths, and they'll be on these big black wooden carts with wheels, and the rest will come on these 2 steel dollies. These steel dollies are longer on one side than the other, and in order to fit 2 side by side on a truck, they do need to be turned so that the long side goes the same length as the truss. Also, there will be wood lining the bottom of the dolly that the truss sits on. This is important because a steel dolly will bend an aluminum piece of truss without that wood there. Then the truss will get strapped down with 2 straps that should be easily found in the strap box that came with the equipment. Wiring and lighting. Once the truss is installed above the booths or hanging from the ceiling, it's time to wire the track in the truss and get things lit up. Each piece of aluminum truss will have 2 tracks zip tied into it. But we only ever power one of those 2 tracks at a time. There's 2 of them so that the truss can face in either direction and just still be plugged in from either side. We use these splitter cables that have 3 female ends and 1 male end at the junction between the 2 pieces of truss. 1 female end plugs into 1 piece of track at each truss at the joint. Then the third one will get an extension cord that travels 20 feet, skipping over the next junction and doing the same thing at the next one. So in a long run of truss, every 20 feet, every other junction in the truss will get one of these splitter cords. We call them king crabs because of the way they look. And then an extension cord that goes off 2 junctions away, and so on forever. That's the whole system for electrifying our truss, extension cords and these things. Occasionally, there'll be a wall with an outlet on top of it for a plug in a booth, in which case you'll just slap another king crab into the mix and power it from there. The lights we use are 17-watt LEDs. So, on a 20-amp circuit, you can fit quite a few lights before you need to split it up. We try to keep it under 100 lights per circuit just to leave some headroom for weak breakers or an unexpected number of 100-watt laptop chargers. When it comes to installing the lights themselves, they plug up and into the tracks that are already zip-tied into each piece of truss. If you look closely at the tracks, one side has 2 copper strips and the other side just has 1. The side that has 2 copper strips will have a groove that runs the length of the track. So when you go to install a light, you'll see a corresponding 2 copper tabs on the bottom of a light fixture. And those 2 tabs will be twisted towards the side of the track with the groove. Most of our lights have this same little cube on the track side of the light bulb. So you'll put the copper tabs lengthwise into the track, pull down on the cube, and then just twist it towards the groove, such that the 2 copper tabs are going towards the 2 copper strips side of the track. That's what the groove is for. Same thing in reverse. To deinstall the light, first you pull up on that cube, which allows this to twist and come out of the track. A few of our light cans have been replaced, and instead of a pulling and twisting cube, it has a little tab that you have to push in on the side of the cube. When we're tearing down the show, we need the lights to be counted and stacked neatly into these wire cages. Then you'll attach a little green label on each cage that will say how many lights are in it. Also, we've got 2 different types of LED lights. We have spots and floods. The only difference between the 2 is how narrow the beam of light that comes out of them is. They'll both look just like this, but the lights with the narrower beam will have a little S written right on the bulb for spot. If the power's turned on and the track's plugged in, and when you put a light in the track, it does not emit a warm, bright light, please refer to the next video about common troubleshooting tips for this system. Troubleshooting the truss and lights. To figure out why a light won't turn on and to remedy that quickly, the following steps will help. First, if you've got other lights on the same track that do turn on, the problem is with the light itself. Here's what you can do. Start by untwisting the light bulb from the can. Look inside the can and you'll see these copper rivets that hold all the parts together. If there's any tearing in the aluminum around those rivets, the can is bad and it won't work. If there's no tearing around those rivets, the can is fine and can be saved. First, gently twist the light bulb back in. Do not over-tighten. That's what tears the rivets in the first place. Next, at the base of the can, these little copper tabs need to be pulled out somewhat. Just get a pliers and just give those things a little yank. During packing and shipping, some number of these cans are going to get whacked onto the edge of something and pushed in a little bit. They're not making proper contact with the copper strips inside the track and just need to be pulled out a little bit. 90% of the time, this will fix the light. This is almost always the problem with an individual light. But again, that's if you know that there are already lights that work on this same track. So you know the track's not bad, it's in the light. If the whole track seems to have no power, here are the steps to remedy that. First, make sure the cord going to the track has power. We'll be supplying a bunch of these little testers. You can just plug them into the end and you see these light up, it's got power. If it does have power, great. The problem is in the track itself or the track end. The first place that you want to look to troubleshoot is at the back end of the track, not where it plugs in, but the opposite end. Again, in shipping, sometimes these get banged around and this little plastic stopper at the end has come out. And you can actually see on this piece of track how the copper is like sticking out the end just a little bit. If that copper comes out too far, it's no longer making contact with the live end and there's no power in the track. So take all the lights out of the track, unplug the track so you don't get electrocuted, and then just tap in that copper end. We will have shipped a bunch of these little stoppers with our inventory, so you can just plug that into the back of the track, gently tighten it down a little bit, and then try your track again. That's the easiest fix. If you still have no power, the problem will be in the plug end of the track. There's a single set screw that holds this into the track. You can just loosen that and it comes right out. There are 3 connections on each side of this live end. You can simply open up each side of this track end and begin your investigation. It'll be obvious when one of these is disconnected. Once you've discovered the loose wire, tighten it, put everything back together again, and there will be nothing left standing in the way between you and bright light. As for the truss itself, if you come up against a bullet that will not go into a barrel, either the barrel is in backwards, as in spun 180 degrees and the bullet can't go back through the backside, or, and this is a bit more rare, but there was a small number of pieces of hardware from a completely different set of truss that we used at a show one time, years ago, that got mixed in with ours and is taking quite a few shows to weed it all out. Their barrel pieces don't work with our truss system at all, and these pieces can be identified by looking at the barrel itself. The errant barrels that we don't want in our inventory have two slightly but equally beveled sides. If it looks like things aren't lining up, take a close look at the barrel. If there are two sides that are both beveled, then you can just set that aside and use a new piece of hardware. I will be on site to spot these and remove them from our inventory forever. I said it in the initial truss video, but we have new truss and old truss. And while they will go together if you work at it, it'll take a lot less work to join old to old or new to new. So keeping these separate will make assembly easier. If you have any other questions at all, by all means ask me on site at any time. I've been working with this system of truss for a decade. I am the keeper of this equipment and I can usually solve whatever problems pop up with it, or if not, authorize its removal completely. So welcome to space. We're glad to have you on board.